Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, How to Make Your Next Completions Project Headache-Free with Digital Completions. So I'll just start by doing some introductions. My name is Nancy Murray. I'm the Marketing Manager with Dynamisk. I'm based in our Calgary office. And with me today are Brandon White, our RFO Central Manager, and Richard Lavallee. And Rich is Commissioning and Maintenance Manager. And Rich and Brandon are both based in our Sherwood Park office. So Brandon and Rich will be introducing themselves in a bit more detail in a couple of minutes when I turn things over to them. First, I'd like to just take a minute to tell you a little bit about Dynamisk if you're not already familiar with who we are. We've been in business for about 16 years now. We focus in the instrument controls and electrical area, turnkey integrated automation solutions. And just to give you an idea of some of the scope of what we've done over 1,300 ICE-related projects. Our automation engineering hours of work executed over 1.5 million, more than 8 million combined construction, commissioning, and turnaround hours. So we've got a lot of horsepower under the hood in terms of the work that we've done over the past 16 years. And you're going to be hearing about digital completions today. We have a digital completion software package that has been developed, RFO Central. So it's our own very powerful cloud-based completion software. And it was developed by our people in the field, people that really know completions inside and out, to be used in the field. So throughout the course of the presentation this afternoon, you are going to see a few screenshots of RFO Central just to illustrate some of the points that Brandon and Rich are making. So with that, I'll just run through a couple of logistics. First of all, microphones and cameras are both turned off by default. So you won't be able to just speak to us, but if you do have any questions throughout the course, if you're having any difficulty with audio or seeing the images, you can type a message into the Q&A chat box. It'll show up in a flyout on the left-hand side. So if you're not seeing it on your screen right now, just move your mouse over to the left and hover, and it will fly out for you. So you can click in there, type a question, and then I'll see that. We will have some time set aside at the end of the webinar for Q&A as well. So as we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in there. And then I'll be able to read them out for Chuck and Rich to, for Brandon and Rich to answer. So with that, I will turn it over to the two of you.
Okay, so my name is Brandon White. I am the RFO Central Manager for Dynamisk. I've worked in the last 9 years or so trying to develop this software. Our RFO is, like Nancy had mentioned, Dynamisk internal completion software. So I've worked in completions and turnover for approximately 9 years now in various projects around North America. Before that, I actually worked in construction. I apprenticed as an electrician and then got into project controls and earned value management. So I have experience doing that too, as well as quality control. So yeah, I have a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, journeyman electrician, and a professional engineer.
Good afternoon. I'm Rich Lavallee, Manager of Commissioning and Maintenance. I graduated from NAIT's Instrumentation Technology program back in April 2000. Over my 20-year career, I witnessed the evolution of completions from the paper model to the greater digital model. I've got firsthand knowledge of the benefits of a digital completions and the shortfalls of the traditional paper model.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the things we're going to discuss today. First thing we want to talk about is what is completions, and then what is the difference between traditional methods and digital completions. Then we're going to talk about the risks of traditional methods and how to mitigate them with digital completion methods. And then we're going to talk about some of the benefits of going digital, so some of the disadvantages of the traditional methods, and then what we can get as a benefit for going to the newer digital style systems. And then we'll talk about data security considerations, what the benefits are of going to a cloud-based system. And then we'll talk about digital completion workflow, so how we can integrate completions into the entire project life cycle of the project. And then finally, at the end of the presentation, we're going to talk about post-project benefits. So some of the things that we can use our digital completion system for that's not available for traditional methods. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what is the definition of completion? So the definition is the process of ensuring an industrial system is safe and ready for production or operations. Now, in the industry, we tend to focus a lot on operations as right in a definition. So when we talk about completions, normally people think about turnover from construction commissioning over to operations after startup. But the reality is that completions is something that has to happen at every phase of the project life cycle, starting from design through construction and then into commissioning and startup. It's an ongoing process. It doesn't just happen once in a project. So some examples of that, for instance, if you talk about engineering design phase, we have to complete our squad checks. We have to get our gating processes sorted out. We have to authenticate documents. So those are all completions that have to happen in design. And then when it comes to fabrication and construction, the next phase, we have factory acceptance, site acceptance, inspections and testing, quality control, and also we have to do completions for progress invoicing in a lot of cases, depending on the subcontractor and their contract. And then in commissioning startup, we have completions for energization, pre-startup safety reviews, and inspections, function testing, those sorts of things. And then finally, when we get into operations and maintenance, we have to do completions for optimization, debottlenecking, and turnaround. So although traditional completions focuses heavily on turnover to operations, in practice, a properly defined turnover process is a requirement of all previous phases for the successful execution of the project, right back to the inception of the project and procurement. And then at each one of those transitions, intersections between those phases, we have turnover that requires a method of calculating progress, tracking deficiencies, and identifying remaining scope. Identifying remaining scope is a big one, which we'll talk about a little bit. Okay, so we talked a little bit about completions. What is digital completions? Digital completions is the same thing, but the only difference is that we're moving to a digital system. So here we have the definition: a paperless system for tracking completions within a central data repository. So I'll talk about some of the things that a paperless system can do here briefly. So first of all, it's accessible anywhere. Your digital completions exist in the cloud. It's internet-based, so you can access it from anywhere. The second thing is that deficiencies are visible to all stakeholders. So everybody can log in and take a look at what's happening, and they pull reports and see what's happening at every phase of the project. Reporting is also instantaneous. So as soon as the completions happen in the field, the checklist gets submitted back to the database, for instance. You can report on that instantaneously. So you can have automated reports send out progress. You can pull the reports yourself, or you can have it log into the system and take a look. Next thing is that it's searchable. So we'll talk about that here when we get to the benefits, but that's a huge benefit of digital completions, that you can actually search the database. And that gives you the ability to plan and schedule work ahead of time, and also to look ahead in the project. Digital completions also allows you to maintain data integrity throughout all phases of the project lifecycle. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about here is this concept of thrashing. So thrashing is a computer science term, actually. And you see the definition up on the screen there. It says expending a large amount of resources to do a minimal amount of work. So everybody's had this experience, especially on the older computers, where you're trying to do something and the lights are flashing, the disk is moving, but the computer's actually not doing any work. So what's actually happening is what's called thrashing, and it happens because the operating system is running too many threads at the same time. And because it's running too many threads, the processor spends all of its time swapping memory instead of actually completing work. So the reason I bring this up is because it's a good analogy for the problem we face in the project lifecycle. Instead of running threads, we're actually trying to complete phases of the project. And a lot of the time and effort in trying to get your completions done is wasted in swapping memory from one phase to the next, right? So your digital completion system can help streamline this process so we don't run into thrashing. Okay, so we talked about the definitions of what completions is versus digital completions. The next thing we'll move on to here is the risks of traditional methods versus the benefits of how we can mitigate them with digital completions. The first and most obvious one is that traditional methods require a lot of paper. So, printing paper off, scanning it in, filing them away, it's very labor intensive. We can mitigate that with digital completion system, go paperless, and get rid of all that. Another benefit of going paperless is we don't have to store paper. There's no physical material that we have to store somewhere, and it's also environmentally friendly. The next thing with traditional methods is that our progress is unknown, and the reason for this is because it's very difficult to quantify remaining scope when we talk about traditional methods. We can count up the total checklist that we've already done. That's easy, well, relatively easy. You just have to go through the binders and tally them up. But trying to identify what's remaining and what's yet to be done or what hasn't been done is extremely difficult. So we can mitigate this with digital completion systems, which automate this process, right? So the idea is with a digital system, we put placeholders in for all our future work, and therefore we know which exhibits need to be completed ahead of time, which allows us to report on not on just what's been done, but also what is remaining to be done. And as far as reporting, we can create those reports. It gives us a lot of flexibility on how to report it, which is another benefit, and I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, a great example where the digital model helped to show any holes and turnovers was on a prior project we had. It was an expansion of a SAGD plant. So at the time, we convinced our customer to use our digital completion software. And shortly thereafter, our customer soon realized the great impact of their decision. So there was a contractor that were intending on submitting a turnover with hundreds of incomplete or even missing quality documents. So our digital software tool flagged these holes of all these missing documents. And this prevented the contractor from trying to submit an incomplete turnover. Now, if we were using the paper model, the paper completions model would not have stopped this contractor from submitting an incomplete turnover. And it would have been only once the customer had reviewed all the turnover, and it would take months for them to notice, oh my goodness, we are missing all these documents. And by then, sometimes it's really hard to hold your construction teams or contractors accountable for missing documents.
So given our experience in completions, we've kind of noticed that there's a rule of thumb for how many exhibits need to be completed. That includes inspections, quality control documents, red lines, etc. is usually about 5 to 1. So that means if you have a project that has 20,000 tags, you're going to have, by the time it turns over to operations, you're going to have 100,000 documents of exhibits that need to be filed away. So the point of bringing that up is that in a system, when you're dealing with such a high quantity of paper, you want a method of tracking everything. Okay. So the next benefit, the problem with traditional systems is that the data, once it's finished, is inaccessible. So you populate a bunch of binders, you file them away somewhere. Sometimes they go to a storage locker. Might be at the corporate office in downtown Calgary, which is why I'm showing this picture of the skyline of Calgary here. That's not very convenient for the people working on site that need to get things. If something comes up in the field, let's say a valve fails or something, and they need to go find where the documentation is, who inspected it and when. Trying to track that down is very difficult with traditional methods. They might have to go to a storage locker somewhere or phone somebody up, try and track it down, if it exists at all. So with a digital completion system, of course, everything is accessible. It's on the web, you can log in, anybody can go in there and find the documentation that's relevant to what you're looking for.
Yeah, we are currently managing the completions of a multi-billion-dollar petrochemical facility. As we all know, we're coming out of this pandemic, but during the pandemic, there was very limited office space at the actual project site. So fortunately, with the digital completions tool, we were able to transition our site team all to their homes, and they were able to successfully manage and turn over hundreds of thousands of exhibits all from their homes. And it was great because with social distancing, it allowed site to use the actual office spaces that they could use for roles that could not be done remotely. And if it wasn't for the digital completion system, this would have made it even more difficult to create space for everyone at site.
And this also rolls over into talking about accessibility, into the value of being able to load up front your maintenance management system from when the project is in the completion stage. We can capture that information and load the MMS ahead of time, so that's also accessible. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Okay, the next thing is reporting. Trying to track your completions, getting calculations on your percent complete. With traditional methods, this is a manual process. So in some cases, you might have literal spreadsheets and calculators. And typically, these days, it happens in spreadsheets, but it's very labor intensive. You have to go get that information, load it into your spreadsheet, and then write a bunch of formulas to try and figure everything out. And then if it's a daily report, you have to go through that process possibly every day, which is not necessary. If you have a digital completion system, everything is real time. So because everything exists in a database, we can pull reports automatically that tabulate all this stuff. And there's lots of flexibility when it comes to the databases these days for building reports. Lots of platforms like SSRS, Tableau, Power BI. Having it in a digital repository of some sort gives you the flexibility to report on it in any way that you want. Okay, the next problem that we run into with traditional methods is conflicting deficiency logs. So this is actually something I notice a lot in the field. It starts as early as construction, but carries over into startup, commissioning startup, and then into operations. Is that every division, whether CMT or CSU operations, will have their own deficiency log, and then their subcontractors, vendors will have their own too. And they track it in all sorts of different ways, sometimes in spreadsheets, sometimes on a piece of cardboard, sometimes in an Access database, or they might be building their own system for tracking deficiencies. The problem with that is that there's no consolidated central deficiency log, so nobody's looking at the same thing. And I've seen on some cases on projects where it'll be a full-time job where somebody has to go and grab these every single day, try to compile them into a massive master list, then identify where they're duplicated, and then also it's very difficult to see what they're missing from there too. So those can all be mitigated with a digital system where it's a universal deficiency log. So it's the instant somebody completes the checklist in the field, that deficiency goes right back into the log and it's visible to all stakeholders. So anybody that can log in and look at it. Plus, if you really need it in a spreadsheet format, you can always build a report that pumps it out in whatever format you want. So if your construction management team wants to see it in a daily report in a spreadsheet, it can be set up to do that.
Yes, digital completions really streamlines deficiency management. It gives visibility to the stakeholders, prevents duplication of multiple deficiencies. It also allows planners and schedulers to modify work plans and schedules accordingly to account for all these deficiencies. And then there's also the benefit of the audit trail. You can audit when deficiencies are entered, modified, and completed.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about with traditional systems is how completions happens in different languages. And what I mean by that is that especially in the construction and engineering phases of the work, everything happens by work pack. So you have your construction work pack or engineering work pack, or sometimes it might be done by area. But by the time it moves over into the commissioning and startup, everything needs to be systemized by process in the plant, which is a completely different way of grouping all your tags together. And this causes a lot of problems for turnover because in the construction world and the engineering world, it makes sense to turn everything over by work pack because in most cases the plant hasn't even been systemized yet. Systemization needs to be done by the people starting it up, which is typically your commissioning team or operations. So this is an industry-wide problem, right? And typically right now, the solution that people are trying to come at it with is they want to try and force systemization onto your construction and engineering subcontractors by getting them to systemize it. But that's kind of the backwards way of doing it because that's not in their expertise. Plus, they don't even really have an idea of how the startup's going to be happening in a lot of cases. So they end up systemizing it by just making a grab bag full of tags and throwing them in there. But by the time it goes to commissioning, all your system boundaries have changed anyways. So it makes that turnover obsolete. Whereas with the digital completion system, the software or the database does all that translation for you. So we have this picture of the universal translator. What happens is that database does all the work of translating between your different turnover languages. And so in this case, what I mean by that is between your work packs versus your systemization. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is tracking systems. So without a digital completion system, everybody ends up building their own trackers in the field. And these, again, will take a lot of different formats. It might be Excel-based, some kind of spreadsheet, or it might be Access, or even their own database. The same problem that they have with the deficiency logs, again, is what they run into with your different tracking systems. It means that there's no master tag list that people are working off of. So everyone generates their own tag list. They're often not tied back to engineering at all. And as the project goes forward, it's difficult to consolidate all these into one single master repository so you can get an idea of what your completions are actually at. Whereas with a digital system, everybody's working off the same single source of truth, ideally tied right back to engineering. And then if their different divisions or subcontractors want those trackers in a certain format, we can always build a report that builds the report into the format that they want to see.
Yeah, a great example of this. There was a project where the home office engineering team had their own list of deliverables, and the site execution team had a completely different list of their deliverables. Now, when we got engaged in this project, we used our digital completions tool to compare these two lists of deliverables and to find all the holes or any discrepancies. And we were able to consolidate a lot of data into what, as Brandon alluded to a single source. And this would have been a painstaking task using a paper model.
Okay, so we talked about the risks and mitigation. Now we'll go on to talk about some of the additional benefits of going to digital completion systems. So the first and most important one is that everything's auditable. So if you think about the way that traditional paper binders are, I mean, you might have the person's name and the date of when it was filled out on the bottom of the exhibit or checklist, but you don't know when they filed it away. You don't necessarily know that date actually lines up with when somebody completed the work. In a database, everything is time-stamped with the username and the date that it was done. So you can go back and audit when things were changed, when things were submitted, when the completions happened, and you can pull a report on any of those kinds of things. Okay, the next benefit that we get is that we can set the database up through the application layer to create permissions. So every user that's in the system has an account, and we can set their permissions up so that only certain people can edit certain things. In one case, you may have somebody that's only their job description is managing deficiencies or punch lists, and we may only want to give them the ability to edit the deficiencies in the system. So with that, with the digital completion system, we can set it up to do that, and that helps maintain data integrity of they're not making changes to the data where they're not supposed to. Benefit is it's searchable. So if you also think about some of these traditional methods where they put everything in a binder, It's very difficult to go back and find what you're looking for. If you want to find a tag number, it's supposed to be in one system, but it was turned over 3 years ago before they even had everything systemized, so it's in the wrong system. Can't go back and track that. Looking through a lot of binders, flipping through a lot of paperwork. In a digital completion system, it's just like a search engine. You can use search terms to search on exclusions, for instance, and use that to be able to find the documentation that you're looking for instantaneously. The next benefit is that digital systems allow you to capture a lot of metadata. And what I mean by metadata is data about data. So I talked about that briefly with timestamps and user stamps. But also another one that we can capture is photos. So then these digital completion system, when they're out in the field completing the checklist of the tablet, in addition to entering any deficiencies, they can also snap a photo of the instrument or the nameplate. And then that information goes back in the database, which you can use to preload your MMS either during or after the project. And then also, one other example of that is the possibility of getting GPS data. So these tablets have geopositioning on them. So when they capture the photo, the position can be logged away, and then that gets back into your database as metadata that you can pull later.
Yeah, this is where our customers have told us many times where they see some of the greatest value with the digital completions. It's because our field technicians use tablets to complete quality checks in the field. And during these checks, they also capture equipment information. And this information can be, a model number, a brand name, a serial number. And then what we do with this is this information is then passed to our customers' reliability team, and they use this to pre-populate their maintenance management softwares. And these reliability groups are so happy to have valid information that's accurate and up to date. And this is done long before they actually become, for lack of better words, equipment owners.
The next benefit we have with the digital systems is the ability to pre-populate your scheduling software. So what we can do, since we have all your tasks loaded into the completion software, it's an easy thing to go through and associate hours against those tasks. And then that way we can get an accurate depiction of what your completions are actually at against specific schedule IDs that you can put into your scheduling software, whether it be Primavera P6 or Microsoft Project. So this doesn't just apply to commissioning and startup, but also to construction, which is a big one. A lot of times your contracts that you have with your subcontractors are lump sum, and those are based on progress invoicing. So we need to get an accurate depiction of where our completions are at so that we can actually fulfill the contract obligations with the subcontractor. The next benefit is that we can set prerequisites. This is something that's really difficult to track when you're dealing with paper. In a database, one good example of this is what we call a PSSR, or a pre-safety startup review. That document cannot be done until a list of tags that are related, or inspections that are related to that system, are all complete. Or at least there's an exemption against them, that somebody actually says we don't necessarily need this one to start it up safely. With paper systems, this is really difficult to try and figure out, especially to what you're missing. You might be missing inspections, you don't know that. But with a digital completion system, we can set up prerequisites to lock out that inspection from being completed until all the prerequisites are done. So it gives you that ability. The next thing here is that it eliminates a lot of human effort. And so this is talking about printing stuff off, filing it away, scanning stuff in, creating binders. I see a lot of cases where we're building loop packs or walk down packs in the field. And there's often a lot of human effort that is completely unnecessary in a digital completion system, where they're just basically creating documentation and trying to file it away.
In 2004 is where I was first exposed to completions. Now, this project at the time, they were using the paper model. So we had to print out thousands and thousands of sheets of paper, put them all in these expensive white binders. Then we would fill in the sheets. And once we were done, we would then walk these over to another trailer full of people and hand them these 3-inch binders full of papers. And then this turnover team would spend months and months going through these binders, making sure everything was completed. And at the end of the job, when they were all done looking through all these binders and the millions of hours that took to put all this stuff together, they just go and throw all these binders away.
The next benefit is visibility. So the digital completion system, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to reporting. But a lot of these systems, you can log right in and take a look at the dashboard and see what's going on in real time. And that, when I say real time, I mean the instant that the person in the field actually completes the check and it gets synchronized with the database. That's instantaneously available for everybody that's looking at it, whether they're pulling a report or looking in the database, or whether they're looking at this dashboards or consoles that you can build into these completion software tools. So and because it's online, anybody can access it anywhere. And that's a big contrast to traditional methods where there is no visibility. I mean, somebody has the binder in an office somewhere, possibly in a storage unit or in the back of their truck. Who knows, right? And trying to track that down to quantify where you're at, the visibility is very difficult to get. Okay, last thing in this section I want to talk about is future dividends. So how much can a problem cost in a project? When we talk about completions, these are the types of cost benefits that we can get from implementing these early on in the project. So in the design phase, when there's deficiency that happens, it costs a little bit of money to fix. You talk to your engineering contractor or whoever's doing the design, and you get them to correct it. It might relate to a change order of a few hours worth of work, just as a hypothetical. But if that deficiency gets missed and moves into the construction phase, you're dealing with additional contracts, right? So your vendors and your suppliers, you have procurement items that are already scheduled for delivery. You're talking about potential cost impacts like trade stacking, schedule compression. So it compounds the amount of cost it is to try and correct that issue. If it gets missed again and goes into commissioning phase, then it starts to impact your startup schedule and your startup skylines. And then it's going to cost a lot more. At that time, you already have vendors on site, and you have to schedule them in to be there. So you might have to go back and get it done by construction. So the cost is even more than it is in the construction phase. If it gets missed again and then goes past startup and into operation phase, the plant's operational. So in order to correct the problem, you're talking about isolation. You may have to shut down or schedule a turnaround to get the issue fixed. And as you can see here, that single issue, by the time it gets to operations, you're talking many, many times the amount of cost it would have been to catch it early. And so it's exponential. And why I bring this up is because the idea is to get your completion software into the beginning of the project as early as possible to catch those deficiencies before they become massive cost. Okay, so that wraps up some of the additional benefits of going digital. Now I want to talk about our data security considerations. So the first and most important one here is that because your data is in the cloud, everything's backed up. So you don't have to worry about somebody dropping a binder in the mud or a fire taking place and burning all your documentation or a flood or something. It's in the cloud and it's backed up. So most of these databases, in our case, we use Azure, and they back up automatically. So you never have to worry about your data being lost. Data residency. So the next thing to talk about is in some cases where you may be on projects that have national security implications, such as like a nuclear facility. your data needs to reside on a server somewhere in that country, right? And so with a digital completion system, it's easy just to port over your data to where it belongs to comply with these kinds of regulations. Because everything's in a database, you can move it easily. Security, everybody has an account in the application. Those accounts can be set up with multi-factor authentication to ensure that only certain individuals are able to get in there. So it increases the amount of security that you have on your project. And the next thing is permissions-based data privileges. So I talked about this briefly before, but this is also something that is relevant when we're talking about security. Since only certain individuals have certain permissions to change the data in certain ways, that increases your security and the integrity of the data, since they can't change stuff that they don't have the ability to change. Okay, so that wraps up digital data security considerations. I'm going to move on to digital completions workflow. I want to talk about how we can integrate completions into the project lifecycle to help offset some of those costs that I talked about earlier. So the idea here is, like I said before, we want to get completions in as early in the process as we can, ideally right into the design stage. That way, from design, you get a master list of tags, and it ports over into your construction and then commissioning. And then we manage the change of that tag list as we go through the project. Your completion software is meant to manage the project when everything's in flux. And then at the end of the project, or not necessarily at the end, but even during the project, we can have it update your maintenance management system or dock control. That's specifically when I'm talking about red lines, on an ongoing basis. And we do that simply by building reports to export out the relevant information. So when we get into the construction phase, in the industry right now, when we award the project, normally what happens is we ask whoever's awarded the work to supply the client or the owner of the project the information on how they're going to be completing their inspections or quality control. And that's really what we're trying to get people to understand, is that that's backwards. We don't want them to tell us how to turn things over. We should be driving it and telling them exactly how we want their inspections to happen and which ones they need to do. And the idea is that we have all of our divisions and subcontractors working off the same systems, and a digital completion system can help out with that. We want to have our completions team in the room with the people that are awarding the work, so we can think about how we're going to be starting the plant up and commissioning it at the very beginning and the inceptions of the project, before construction, and ideally back in design and engineering. And then when it comes to commissioning, we need, when the CSU team comes in and systemizes the plant to get it ready for startup, they go through, systemize everything and on the drawings and then the completion software. Those boundaries of those systems are always going to change. They're never static. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. You might have constraints on your work front. Whatever the reason is, we need a way of trying to change these system boundaries easily on the fly. A completion system makes that effortless, because when you change the boundaries of your system, you move the tags over and then it cascades to the database. So it updates all the relevant checklists. You don't have to go back through all of your old checklists and then update them, or try to find them first. And then, like I mentioned before, we can use a completion system after systemized to drive the startup skyline, which is what I have here. Okay, that moves over into scheduling. And what I had mentioned earlier is about scheduling. We can use the completion system to drive our scheduling, so we get completions, an accurate depiction of what completions actually is, without having to try and come up with estimates. We build the report. It comes out of the digital completion software, and then upfront loads your scheduling software. The only thing is we have to do is just make sure we get our schedule IDs aligned between the two different systems. I should mention that these digital completion systems are not meant to replace your dock control software or your maintenance management system or any other systems that people typically are using on site. What it's meant to do is consolidate all the information while the project is ongoing. And then once all that information is complete, then we load these systems up, like your dock control or your MMS. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to post-project benefits. Some of the things that we can expect as benefits of using digital completions even after the project is complete. And the very biggest one that we've been talking about here a little bit is capturing data for your maintenance management system. And so we've got, industry standard ones are Maximal, SAP, SmartPlant. As I mentioned before, your completions database is not meant to replace these. It's meant to assist in getting the information that you need into these systems. Typically, what I see on a lot of these bigger projects, these databases will be based on whatever came from engineering at the beginning of the project. By the time everything's commissioned and starting up, they're way out of date, sometimes 5 to 6 years out of date. And what happens is we end up sending a team of people out to capture that information, which is completely unnecessary. We have, during the commissioning phase, you send your commissioning people out at that phase of the project to go inspect everything anyways. Why not have them capture the information that you need to pre-populate your MMS so you don't have to do it twice? That's the point of using a completion system. And the process works like this. So your checklists are customized to include the required fields that you need to pre-populate your MMS. Those checklists are sent to the mobile device for your crew to fill out in the field. When they're standing at the device, they do their inspection, they collect the data that's necessary. And then they synchronize with the digital completion system to load into the database. And then what happens is we build a report. That report comes out of the digital completion system either on an ongoing basis, like weekly or monthly, or we can do it at the end of the project too. That load sheet is built to just load copy and paste right into your MMS. So you get accurate information right from the field and you're not relying on outdated engineering information. Another thing I want to mention here is the ability to consolidate red lines. So red lines are also a difficult thing to track in the field. Everybody that touches the document is going to be potentially adding some markup onto it. And then sometimes I see where people try to manage this inside of their dock control, which is very unwieldy because until the document is finalized and stamped, you don't really know how many different markups are going to be coming from all your various groups and subcontractors. So the idea is we want only to move the red lines over into your document control after you've consolidated all your markups into one master red line. And then it can go and live in your document control for posterity, I guess. Your digital completion system can help with that because while the project's ongoing, those documents can be issued out to the field. They can mark it up and then go back to your database as in our system, we use what's called a stack. It goes at the top of the stack, and at the end of all of your project, you can go through all your markups and consolidate them into one red line. The next thing I want to talk about is cause and effect testing. So when we talk about SIS, that's one of the things that almost never gets really captured in a project. And this ties into your cause and effects as well. So what we see typically in the field is people print these cause and effect sheets off and then just highlight their logic tests as they go through between their inputs and their outputs. And at the end of doing their function testing, that document, it may go into a binder somewhere that nobody can find, or it may just go right in the garbage. And so you know that your SIS and your DCS checks have been done but how do you go back and audit it? It's very difficult to do. There's no name attached to it. Even if you have the markup with the highlighted checks, you don't necessarily know who did it and when. So in a digital completion system, what we do is we take this matrix, cause and effect matrix or shutdown key, and we convert it into a tabular format, a list of tasks that need to happen. And then we take those tasks and we put them against both the input and the output tag so that they exist inside your completion software. And then what happens to your DCS technicians as they're testing out their control system, doing their logic tests, function testing, they can complete the task one by one inside your completion system, and you get the whole history of which technician did it, when they did it, and then you can pull that as a report for completions on your DCS testing. Warehousing. So another benefit of post completions is that you can take the entire database and store it somewhere. With paper copies, this is also very difficult to do. You have to store it somewhere physically, and some of those locations might not be that secure. Whereas with a digital completion system, after the project is done and you don't need the system up and running, you just take the database and you store it in the cloud somewhere, and it exists there forever. That way, if you need to go back and get information out of it, it's just as simple as going back and pulling a query. And then finally, one of the other benefits is to repurpose the data for turnarounds for, you can use this data that you use in your completions for future stuff that's ongoing in operations. And that includes turnarounds, debottlenecking, and then optimization. These are all things that we can use the data for.
We had a customer experience a valve failure. This failure caused significant damages and losses. It resulted in a dispute between our customer and the manufacturer. So our customer was able to retrieve a quality document from the completion software. And this document was used to prove proper installation and preservation. Ultimately, this helped our customer to receive compensation from the valve manufacturer.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. I just want to summarize the things we talked about. So we went through what traditional completions is versus what digital completions are, the differences between them. We talked about the risks associated with traditional methods and how to mitigate them. Then we went through and talked about some of the additional benefits of going digital. We mentioned some of the security considerations that digital completion systems can help out with. And then we talked about the project lifecycle and how digital completions can work with your workflow. And then finally, we talked about some of the post-project benefits of going digital.
Okay, thanks, Brandon and Rich. So we've got some time left for Q&A. So again, if you want to ask a question, just hover your mouse over on the left-hand side of your screen, and that little black flyout will come out. You can select the Q&A tab and then type your question in there. And a couple people have already typed in some questions, so we'll just get started with that. First of all, what cloud service providers does the completion software run on? So Google Cloud, AWS, etc.
That depends on which completion software you're using, but in our case, we use Microsoft Azure.
Okay. Can the tablets work offline? We don't have Wi-Fi inside the plant.
Yeah, so again, that depends on which type of completion system you're using. In our case, the one that we use, or our internal completion system, the checklist is just a PDF. So what happens is it synchronizes to the tablet when you issue them in the morning or whenever you're doing it at your office. Then you take the tablet out, and that PDF exists offline. It's just a PDF, so they can fill it out per normal, just like you would a sheet of paper. And then when they come back to Wi-Fi, a Wi-Fi hotspot, it synchronizes again. So yes, it's designed to work offline.
Okay, a couple more questions about tablets here. So let's just kind of group those all together. So what about in hazardous locations? How do you use tablets there?
So there's a couple different ways you can handle that. There are tablets that are available that you can get intrinsically safe. Those tablets are typically Android. I don't think Apple makes intrinsically safe tablets, but they're a bit more expensive. So what we see is some of our clients, rather than buying the tablets, what they'll do is they'll set up the permitting process to allow work permits for people to go out there and fill out their checklists when in a live plant.
Okay, and when you're collecting data with the tablets, using it to populate the maintenance management system, what kind of data are you collecting, and can it be customized?
I'll let Rich take that one.
Yeah, I can take this one. So yes, and this is where the customers see the value is in the customization. So typically what happens is when we kick the project off, we actually sit down with the reliability or maintenance group, and they give us a list of all of the, I call it DNA, that they're looking for whether it's a transmitter, a transformer, a piece of switchgear, a VFD drive. They'll list all of the requirement or all the data they like, and out of that pool of data, they'll say these are the must-haves and these are the nice-to-have. And then what we do with that is on our quality check sheets, we will then add all the required fields that are mandatory to capture information, and then we also list the ones that are nice to have, and our field technicians go out, do their quality work, and at the same time they capture all that relevant information. And this could be, you know, a brand name, a serial, transformers. They often like to know what kind of oil's in there, what's the dielectric, how many stator bars, all types of stuff.
Okay, thanks. At what point in the project should a digital completion system be implemented?
So the answer to that question is as early as possible. So the most crucial points, like I mentioned before, to have your completion software implemented is when you're setting up your contracts and when you're awarding them. So you should have somebody that has an idea of what the completions is going to look like in there with them. And ideally, you want that even in the design stages so that you can get your master tag list right from engineering. And then you can also use your completions, like I mentioned, in the engineering phase for your squad checks, for instance.
And if you can get it implemented in the early stages, it can help resolve many headaches. Over and over and over again, every project we go on, there's always an issue with package equipment or vendor equipment. What happens is the vendors, when they do their turnover to the engineering department, they always miss, whether it's a data sheet or a drawing, there's always holes. And by the time you get to site and execute the work, you know what, these vendors have gotten their money paid out to them. And if you go back to them asking for, please provide a data sheet or please provide this, yeah, you know what, they just turn a blind eye, and it causes RFIs and so many delays and cost overruns on projects.
All right, a couple more questions here. On a large project, there could be multiple contractors on site. If they all have their own QA documents and processes, how do you handle that?
Okay, so most completion software, and specifically ours, you can customize the checklist in any way that you want. So you're not limited to whatever the library is inside of the digital completion system. You can take whatever their exhibits are and then just convert them so that they can use those exhibits. Ideally, you want to write it into the contract so that everybody's using the same inspection documents if possible. That doesn't always happen, so the alternative is to be able to convert theirs. But finally, I mean, we do get a lot of resistance, particularly in the construction world, to using digital systems. People are very attached to paper. So most of these systems, and specifically the one we've designed, we have a legacy support for paper checklists as well. So the idea is you put the placeholders into the database, and they print off either a cover sheet with a QR code on it or a sticker with a QR code, and then they can put it on their own exhibits and then file them into your completion software so you get everything in your completions database.
And that's why it's so important to try and implement completions as early as possible. So then when companies go out and get contracts signed, then they can put in the contract that they need to do the deliverables through a completions tool that is universal to the whole project. Then the end user or the customer actually knows what they're getting handed over. And that's why it's so important to get this done ahead of time. Because if not, then everybody will have their own system and you can't audit anything.
All right. You talked about tracking function testing using shutdown keys. Can you tell me how that's done in the completions database?
Okay, so the way we do that here is we'll typically try and get the either the shutdown key or the cause and effect matrix. And if it's in PDF format, then we'll digitize it. Typically, we try and get it in Excel format, its native format. And then what we'll do is we have a routine that we run that unpivots the information. So typically on your cause and effects matrix, you'll have your inputs on the horizontal axis and your outputs your inputs on the vertical axis and your outputs on the horizontal. We unpivot that into a tabular format. Tabular just means that it is a list of every input and output and then the logic that needs to happen. We take those and we convert them into tasks, and we load those tasks into RFO or in your completions database as tasks that go against both the input and the output, so that when your your DCS technician completes the task, he just goes and checks it off, and it flags it as being done on both the input and the output. And that's one of the things I'm not sure about other systems, but in our system, you can set it up so that both the input and the output are on the same task. That way, when you complete it, you can see it done on either one. We call it multi-tape functionality.
Hey, does Dynamisk have experience utilizing RFO during a customer scheduled maintenance outage, i.e. post-construction? How would you go about implementing digital completions for a turnaround?
Yes, we do. And because of this, we get a lot of recurring turnaround work. One of our customers engaged us because of this. So what they do is on their yearly turnarounds, and they use our completions tool, RFO Central, to track all of their SIL or SIS devices. And this way, because they need to prove to their insurance or their underwriter that these SIS or SIL rated instruments have been checked for proper functionality, that they're calibrated in range, and they need to prove this. So they use our completions tool to generate these exhibits, and then send those exhibits to their underwriter, and it allows them to pass their audits, and it's actually makes it their auditing from their insurance provider very simple. They just go into our tool and they send them all of our exhibits electronically, and it's very seamless, and it's very easy for our customer.
It's also something that almost never gets captured in traditional systems is your SIS type testing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that we've had come in, and we're just about at the top of the hour, so timing is perfect. So you'll see on the screen here contact information for both Brandon and Rich, as well as general contact information for Dynamisk. So certainly if you have any more questions or you want to get in touch with us, feel free to do that through email or phone. And in the next day or so, you'll also receive an email with your certificate of completion attached for this, because this qualifies for professional development credits for most professional associations. And you'll also get a link to be able to rewatch the webinar, at any time that you want to in the future. So watch your email for that. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.